At my dad's retirement dinner, he raised his glass and said, "Only the children who made me proud are truly mine." Everyone laughed, clapped, toasted to his legacy. Then he looked straight at me, the son who became a teacher, not a lawyer, not a CEO, and said, "You can leave." The room went silent. Forks froze midair. I stood up slowly, my chest burning like someone had branded failure into me. Cameras kept rolling, my father smiled, and I realized humiliation was part of his speech. But before I could walk away, my wife stood too. And what she did next silenced every person in that golden room. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love knowing how far a story like this can reach. It reminds me I'm not alone in what happened. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. The night my father retired, Seattle was washed in rain thick enough to blur the skyline. By the time Alara and I arrived at the Rose Hill Grand Ballroom, my shoes were soaked through and my heart already felt heavier than the weather. I'd rehearsed what I'd say to him, congratulations, maybe even a quiet, "I'm proud of you too, Dad." But when I stepped into that glittering room filled with chandeliers and cameras, I knew there wouldn't be room for any of that. The banner above the stage shimmered in gold. Vail Education Trust, ex Luminatech Foundation, $6,000 commitment. Everything screamed prestige, crystal glasses, ivory linens, a string quartet humming under polite chatter. My father, Dr. Bennett Vail, stood at the center shaking hands with superintendents and CEOs. He was the image of what the education world called excellence, tall, composed, expensive. And somewhere deep down, I still wanted his approval. We were 10 minutes late. Clarice, my stepmother, didn't miss the chance to note it. "Always the creative spirit," she said with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Her sequined gown reflected the chandelier light in perfect rhythm to her calculated charm. "Don't worry, dear. We saved you a good spot." But as I scanned the VIP table, the one in front of the cameras and sponsors, my name wasn't there. Next to my father's card, the seat read, Sloan Mercer. Clarice's daughter, the rising corporate attorney. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd missed something. Clarice followed my gaze. "You'll find your name at table 19, she said. "We thought you'd be more comfortable with the other educators." The other educators. It landed, like a sentence. Table 19 was tucked behind a marble pillar at the far end of the ballroom. I could already see the difference, the cheaper linens, wilted flowers, the faint smell of overused perfume. I nodded once, jaw tight. As we made our way there, the sound of laughter and champagne clinks echoed behind us. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sloan glide toward the stage with Clarice already shaking hands with donors like she'd inherited the role. My father didn't look at me, not even once. Alara's fingers brushed mine. "Don't react yet," she whispered. Her voice was calm, too calm for what was happening. She pulled out her phone, typing something quick. I caught the screen flash. "Ready." Whoever she was texting replied instantly. When my father took the stage, every flashbulb in the room went off at once. He tapped his glass, smiled the smile I used to think was meant for me, and said, "Tonight marks the end of 30 years serving education." The crowd applauded. He continued, voice smooth, commanding, practiced. And as I reflect on my life's work, I realize something only the children who made me proud are truly mine. The audience laughed. Then came the line that would replay in my head for months. My father's eyes found me. "You can leave." The air cracked open. People glanced between us, unsure if it was a joke. It wasn't. My throat locked, but I stood anyway, my chair scraping the polished floor like a protest. For a second, no one breathed. Then Alara stood too. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes steady, deliberate, met mine. She slipped her phone into her clutch and said softly, "Not yet." He raised his glass, and the room erupted again in applause. To them, it was just another performance. To me, it was exile dressed in gold light. Dr. Patel, sitting near the edge of the VIP table, looked down at his phone and frowned. I didn't know it then, but he'd just received the first message that would change everything. I should have walked out. Instead, I followed Alara's lead, her hand firm around mine. "We'll stay," she whispered. "For now." And under the chandelier's cold brilliance I realized she wasn't scared. She was waiting. Table 19 sat in the shadows, half hidden behind a pillar draped with velvet. The laughter from the main tables reached us only as faint ripples like echoes from another world. Around me sat 5 teachers, people who spent their lives holding classrooms together with patience and duct tape. Ms. Chen from math, Mr. Alvarez from history, Mrs. Torres from elementary. Their smiles were kind, tired, and familiar. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd been invisible in this family long before tonight. Ms. Chen leaned toward me. "You were supposed to be on the board, weren't you? Bennett promised you that seat." I nodded, trying not to let the bitterness slip into my voice. 3 years ago. He said when he retired I'd carry on the foundation's mission. I built an entire proposal programs for teacher training scholarships for underserved schools. Mr. Alvarez let out a dry laugh. "They don't want Mission Vale. They want money. Teachers don't look good in press photos." Across the room, Clarice paraded Sloane from one camera to another. My father followed, his hand on her shoulder, introducing her as the next generation of leadership. The words hit harder than I expected. Ilara excused herself from the table phone pressed to her ear. "Check clause 7.3 and 12.1, she said quietly, before walking away. I didn't know what it meant, but the tone in her voice wasn't casual. It was surgical. I turned my focus back to the stage. Sloane was talking to a local journalist, her hand resting on the back of my father's chair. "The new board has already been finalized," she said confidently. "No need for additional approvals." Something about that sentence hooked me. No need for approvals. It echoed in my head like a note that didn't belong in the melody. At table 19, our silverware didn't match. The flowers were fake. But the conversation was real, teachers talking about funding cuts, about kids who came to school hungry, about parents who worked double shifts. While the main table toasted to innovation and corporate partnerships, we shared stories of classrooms without supplies. I looked around and realized that table 19 wasn't just a seat in the back. It was a mirror showing everything my father's world chose not to see. Ilara returned, sitting beside me again. Her lipstick was smudged at the edge, probably from biting her lip. She leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Patel got the documents. He'll check his email when the time comes." I looked at her, trying to piece it together. "What are you doing?" Her eyes didn't move from the stage. "Just trust me." Trust. The word felt foreign in that moment. But I did. Because in a room full of people who had erased me, she was the only one who hadn't. Clarice's voice rose over the music. "This is Sloane, my daughter, the youngest attorney to lead our education legal division." She turned slightly toward us. "And that's Bennett's son, Dusk. He teaches high school science." Such noble work. The pause before noble was deliberate, a dagger wrapped in sugar. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile, but Ilara reached under the table and squeezed my hand. "Not yet," she mouthed. From across the ballroom, I saw Dr. Patel glance down at his phone again. His expression shifted, eyebrows drawn, mouth tight. Something in that moment told me that Ilara wasn't just some quiet teacher's wife defending her husband's pride. She was setting the stage for something bigger. The music softened into a slow instrumental, the servers clearing plates as the spotlight turned back to the podium. My father prepared for his final announcement, the one he'd rehearsed his whole career for. Around me, my fellow teachers looked up, half listening, half resigned. I sat in the dark corner of the room, the hum of distant applause fading like static. I thought of how many nights I'd stayed up building his legacy for him, drafting proposals, connecting educators, writing his speeches. All of it so he could one day say he was proud. Instead, he'd handed everything to someone else. Ilara's phone buzzed once more. She read the message, then slipped it back into her purse. Her eyes met mine. Almost time. And that's when I understood she wasn't waiting for his permission. She was waiting for his mistake. The ballroom lights dimmed again, and the giant LED wall behind the stage flashed a new headline: Vale Education Trust. Leadership Announcement. I already knew what was coming. The rhythm of my father's voice, the applause in advance, the polite laughter that always filled the gaps of his self-importance. But this time, I felt the edges of it cutting deeper. He smiled into the microphone as if speaking to history itself. For 30 years, we've built this foundation on excellence, discipline, and vision. Tonight, I'm proud to announce the next generation of leadership. The audience leaned forward. I could see Clarice standing at the base of the stage, her hand resting proudly on Sloane's shoulder. Cameras zoomed in. My name wasn't going to be called. "Please welcome the new board successor of the Vail Education Trust, Sloane Mercer," he said. The applause was deafening. The floor trembled with it. Sloane rose gracefully, brushing her hair behind her ear, and accepted the moment like it had always been hers. I sat perfectly still, watching the crowd rise for her hundreds of people, celebrating what had once been promised to me. 3 years of proposals, research, pilot programs, everything I built so the foundation would focus on teachers. Not one word of acknowledgement. Not one glance my way. When Sloane began to speak, her voice was sharp, polished, rehearsed. She spoke about legal innovation, strategic growth partnerships with corporations. She never once mentioned students. Never said the word teacher. The words rang hollow in the grand space, but the audience clapped anyway. I stared at her under the hot stage lights, realizing I was listening to the sound of my own erasure. Ilara sat beside me unmoved. She didn't clap. She just checked her watch, then glanced at Dr. Patel, who was typing something into his phone. I noticed the way she shifted in her seat, composed, calculating. I leaned closer. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. Clarice leaned toward the MC near the stage. I caught just enough to hear her whisper, "Push the teacher recognition segment to the end." The man nodded obediently, shuffling his cue cards. The program skipped straight to the sponsor presentation. The screen lit up again. Lumina Tech Foundation, in partnership with Vail Education Trust. The logo pulsed bright and white across the stage. My stomach tightened. I'd seen that logo before on Ilara's laptop at home weeks ago when she said she was helping with grant reviews. I'd never asked details. Maybe I should have. Sloane posed for photographs with Clarice and my father as the MC announced, "Let's welcome our sponsors to the stage for a photo with our new board appointee." Cameras flashed. Dr. Patel remained seated, his expression unreadable. I could almost feel the hum of tension in his silence. Something inside me broke. I pushed back my chair and stood. Clarice turned immediately, intercepting me with that frozen smile she reserved for polite crises. "Dusk," she said quietly. "Don't cause a scene. This is a family moment." I looked past her at my father, arm around Sloane, smiling at the press. "I'm family, aren't I? Or is that conditional now?" Her smile twitched. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm finally reacting." The air seemed to shift. Guests whispered. My father pretended not to hear me, still talking to the cameras. Ilara rose slowly beside me, her hand brushing my arm. "Not yet," she whispered the words, deliberate, precise. "We're not asking for a seat. We're reading a contract." Her voice carried a calm certainty that cut through the noise. For the first time, I noticed how steady her breathing was. I followed her gaze toward Dr. Patel. He was scrolling through his phone, eyes narrowing at something on the screen. On stage, the music swelled, and my father lifted his glass. I caught the faintest flicker of anxiety on Sloane's face as Dr. Patel stood up quietly and stepped toward the side of the stage, phone still in hand. I didn't understand what Ilara was planning. I only knew she was waiting for something and opening a single moment where truth could split the room apart. The applause rolled again. My father smiled wider. But something in that sound had changed. It wasn't celebration anymore. It was the sharp edge of pride cracking. I stood at the edge of the lights, watching the man who had erased me, unaware that he'd already signed his own undoing. He loved an audience. My father always did. He thrived under the spotlight, every word measured for effect. "Education must evolve," he said, gripping the microphone, voice swelling across the ballroom. "It needs leadership that understands the modern world, that bridges academia and business. Sloan Mercer embodies that vision. The crowd applauded again, champagne glasses chiming. To them, it was inspiring. To me, every sentence felt like a scalpel cutting me out of my own bloodline. I watched him toast his new heir while I stood half in shadow near the back of the room. The cameras turned toward Sloan, catching her practiced nods, her lawyer's poise. For years, I'd imagined standing there myself, being introduced as someone who believed teaching was worth investing in. Now I was just the afterthought his disappointment made visible. Then I saw Alara move. She slid her phone out, typed quickly, and gave a tiny nod to someone near the stage. Dr. Patel's phone buzzed. He frowned, unlocked it, and froze. The light from his screen reflected against his glasses. I saw the words, "Contract document attached." He scrolled fast, and for the briefest moment his eyes met Alara's. Something silent passed between them, confirmation. The next second my father's voice thundered again. "This foundation is a beacon for the next century of education." I started forward. Clarice appeared in front of me like she'd materialized out of thin air. "Don't," she hissed. "Don't humiliate yourself." "He already did that for me," I said. Sloan looked down from the stage, her expression smug. "Some people," she said under her breath, "should learn to accept their place." I took one more step, but Alara's voice stopped me. Calm, clear. "Excuse me," she said, walking straight toward the podium. Every head turned. "Before you continue, I'd like to address the room. On behalf of Lumina Tech Foundation." There was a ripple of confusion. My father blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Dr. Patel raised a hand toward the MC. "Let her speak." Alara climbed the steps. The ballroom lights caught the subtle shimmer of her navy dress, and for the first time that evening she looked every bit the woman who belonged on that stage, not by bloodline, but by command. She took the microphone. "Before this appointment becomes official, we should review the terms of the contract your foundation signed with Lumina Tech. Clause 7.3 outlines the requirement for active educator representation on the board." Silence. The kind that hums right before a storm. My father's smile stiffened. "Mrs. Vale, I don't recall inviting you to comment on internal decisions." Alara didn't flinch. "Then perhaps you should reread the agreement you signed 6 months ago." Cameras swiveled. Dr. Patel stepped closer, holding up his phone. "She's correct," he said. "I have the document. It requires prior sponsor approval before any leadership announcement." The audience murmured, unsure of what they were witnessing. My father's composure faltered. He turned to me, his voice sharp, desperate to reclaim authority. "You did this, didn't you? You brought her into this to embarrass me." I met his stare. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "You did that all by yourself." Clarice rushed to his side, whispering furiously, but her words were drowned out by the buzz spreading through the crowd. Reporters moved closer. Phones raised. The LED screen flickered, then went black. When it blinked back, a new text scrolled across it. Contract Clause 7.3. Active Educator Requirement. Gasps swept the room. My father's legacy, 30 years of unshakable reputation, suddenly looked fragile under a single paragraph of fine print. Alara stepped back, handing the microphone to Dr. Patel, who began reading aloud. "Any appointment to the board must include at least one current classroom educator and requires written approval from the sponsor prior to announcement. Failure to comply constitutes immediate breach of contract." The silence that followed wasn't polite anymore. It was judgment. My father's hand trembled on his glass. Clarice turned pale. Sloan stood motionless, eyes darting between them. I stood at the edge of the stage, breath steady for the first time that night. I looked at Alara, her face calm, unflinching. I realized she'd been building toward this all evening, setting the pieces one by one while everyone else played pretend. My father tried to laugh it off, voice cracking under strain. "We'll resolve this privately," he said, waving a hand. "These are formalities." "Doctor." Patel's tone was firm. "No, Dr. Vale. This is the contract you signed, and it's binding." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was thick enough to feel it pressing against your skin. Cameras kept flashing. Somewhere a waiter dropped a tray, the crash echoing like punctuation. Then in the middle of all that noise, Alara looked at me. Just one look, but it said everything. The moment's here. The stage is ours now. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The screen behind them glowed white, the contract line shining like a verdict. And in that second, I knew the night had just shifted. What had begun as my father's celebration was about to become the reckoning he never saw coming. The ballroom had lost its shape. Lights flickered, the polished floor glistened with spilled champagne, and voices rose in chaos. Cameras zoomed from every angle as Clarice tried to call security, waving her diamond-crusted wrist like a warning flag. But no one moved. All eyes were locked on the stage where Alara stood beneath the enormous LED screen glowing with the contract my father had just violated. Her voice was calm, precise, unshakable. Clause 7.3. She read aloud, her tone cutting through the noise. The governing board must include at least one active educator. All appointments must be approved in writing by Lumina Tech Foundation before public announcement. The room fell silent again. Dr. Patel stepped forward, holding his phone. Confirmed, he said. This clause is in effect. It's signed by both parties. His voice was almost apologetic, but his eyes were clear. My father's jaw tightened. Who gave you permission to access that document? His voice trembled slightly, the first sign of fear I'd ever heard in him. Alara didn't hesitate. I did. Then after a pause that stretched long enough for the entire hall to hold its breath, she said, I'm the one who signed it. My father blinked. What are you saying? She looked straight at him. I'm saying you should know who your partners are before you decide to humiliate them. She turned to the audience, her voice steady. My name is Alara Vale. I am the founder and CEO of Lumina Tech Foundation. For 3 full seconds, the room stopped breathing. The camera flashes stilled. Even the orchestra faltered mid-note. The sound of Clarice's champagne glass shattering against the floor filled the silence. My father's lips parted, but no words came. Sloane stepped forward, panic replacing her composure. That's impossible. Lumina Tech's founder is anonymous, was Alara said simply. Not anymore. Security froze halfway up the aisle. Dr. Patel nodded slowly, confirming the truth. She's telling the truth, he said. Her foundation's documents list her as the primary signatory. This partnership exists because of her. Alara raised her hand toward the LED screen. The contract dissolved into a new slide, an email thread projected across the ballroom wall. This, she said, is from the Vale Foundation's legal office sent by Ms. Mercer. She pointed at Sloane's name. Here it says, and I quote, "We'll announce first. They're just a sponsor. They don't have real authority." The room murmured like a low storm. Clarice's face turned the color of porcelain. Dr. Patel spoke again. That statement alone constitutes a breach under Section 12(1). The partnership is void. My father lunged forward, his face red. You came here to destroy me. No, Alara said quietly. You did that when you forgot what this foundation was built for. The noise rose again, reporters yelling questions, flashes lighting up the stage. My father tried to speak, but his words vanished beneath the rumble of whispers. For the first time in his life, the microphone was no longer his. I watched him sink into confusion, and for the first time I felt no fear. Just clarity. For 3 years, I said, stepping forward, I wrote proposals to support teachers. 12 drafts, all ignored. You said they were too idealistic. I looked toward Dr. Patel. Last year, I sent one of those drafts directly to Lumina Tech. It was called Classroom Equity. Dr. Patel nodded. That proposal is what led Lumina Tech to fund Vale Foundation in the first place. He turned to my father. Your son's work brought you that $6 million sponsorship. Gasps rippled across the room. Alara lowered the microphone slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. You see, she said softly, sometimes standing up doesn't require volume, just truth. My father slumped into a chair, staring at the floor. Clarice tried to smile at a reporter, pretending control, while Sloane typed frantically on her phone, already trying to contain the fallout. I looked around at the faces, the cameras, the blinking red lights of live feeds capturing every second. He taught me to respect the spotlight, I whispered, but he never told me what happens when it turns against you. Alara handed the microphone to Dr. Patel. Effective immediately, she said, Lumina Tech Foundation withdraws its $6 million sponsorship from Vail Foundation. The sound that followed wasn't applause or gasps, it was the collective noise of a legacy collapsing. And yet beneath it all, I felt something rare silence inside me finally, after years of being drowned out. I didn't know that this was only the beginning. The microphones were changing hands for good, and soon everything that had been hidden under his reputation would surface under our names instead. By the time the orchestra stopped playing, the gala no longer felt like a celebration. Guests rushed toward the exit's heels, clicking against marble voices, overlapping in disbelief. The hashtag Vail scandal had already started trending on screens behind the bar. Dr. Patel stood near the podium, speaking into a cluster of microphones as journalists surrounded him. As per the terms of the Lumina Tech contract, he announced the Vail Education Trust is now suspended from all sponsorship benefits pending investigation. A new governing body will be established. Clarice stormed forward, pointing at Alara. You planned this. You set a trap for my family. Alara didn't even flinch. No, she said quietly. You built the trap. I just turned on the lights. My father rose unsteadily from his seat. The confidence that once defined him was gone, replaced by something smaller, rawer. You did this, he said to me, his voice low and shaking. Was it revenge? No, I said. It's the end of pretending education is just a stage for your ego. For the first time, I saw him hesitate, not out of pride, but disbelief. Like he couldn't understand a world where his authority no longer mattered. Alara stepped to the screen again. Before you call this unfair, she said, let's talk about integrity. She pressed a button and a new document appeared. Leadership Advancement Program. Draft by Sloan Mercer. Next to it, another file opened my own proposal, the Classroom Equity Project. Side by side, they were nearly identical. 40%, Alara said calmly. That's how much of his work your daughter copied. Word for word. A hush swept the room. Sloane's face drained of color. We only referenced it, she stammered. Dr. Patel shook his head. This is plagiarism, and a direct violation of the funding ethics clause. Reporters surged closer. Phones lifted. Somewhere a live feed replayed the moment on a giant monitor near the exit. The words Vail scandal flashed in red comments streaming. Father disowns son on stage. Son's wife reveals massive fraud. My father's voice trembled. Patel, please. There must be a way to fix this, to save the foundation. Patel's reply was gentle but final. You can't save something built on broken promises. Alara turned toward the crowd. Lumina Tech will establish a new fund, one that belongs to the teachers, not the boardrooms. Clarice scoffed, but her voice barely carried over the noise. You think people will trust you after this? Alara smiled faintly. They'll trust the truth. Then I stepped closer to my father, my voice quiet enough to make him look at me. You once said, only the children who made you proud are yours. His eyes flickered, wounded. I took a breath. Then from now on, I'm not yours. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to pause. My words didn't echo, they landed final, and still. Dr. Patel spoke again, reading from his phone. Effective immediately, the $6 million partnership between Lumina Tech Foundation and Vail Education Trust is terminated. His tone was clinical, but the meaning reverberated like a sentence. My father's empire, his name, his influence, the identity he wore like armor was gone in an instant. Alara turned to the press, her voice steady. Tonight, Lumina Tech reallocates all $6 million to create the Vail Renewal Fund run entirely by active educators. By those who actually stand in classrooms. The crowd erupted, flashes shouting chaos. But in the center of it all, I felt still. I looked at my father one last time. He sat in his chair staring at nothing, his glass of champagne untouched, his reflection fractured in the crystal. Clarice whispered something to him, but he didn't move. Ilara reached for my hand. Her grip was warm grounding. "I told you," she said softly, "we don't need their table. We build our own." And as the lights flared across the ballroom, the golden letters of his name flickered and faded behind us. In that moment, I realized the night hadn't destroyed us, it had rewritten us. His empire was gone. Ours had just begun. Rose Hill Ballroom was chaos, dressed in glitter. Half the guests were gone, the rest clutched their phones like shields, filming what had become the downfall of a legend. My father sat in the front row motionless, a man watching his own empire burn. Clarice hid her face in her manicured hands. Sloane's phone lit up with messages from her firm, client concerned. Damage control now. Someone pushed a microphone toward me. I shook my head, but Ilara pressed it into my hand. "You told your students to stand up for what's right," she said. "Do it now." I walked into the light. The cameras flashed. For the first time, my father looked up. 12 years ago, I became a teacher. My father said I was wasting potential. 3 years ago, he promised me a board seat, then gave it to someone else without a word. Tonight, I'm not seeking revenge. I just want to show that what you look down on still matters. The crowd stilled. Even the sound crew stopped moving. "Dr." Patel cleared his throat. "For the record," he said, "Lumina Tech Foundation has withdrawn all sponsorship from the Vail Education Trust. The foundation is officially defunct." A journalist shouted, "Dr. Vail, do you plan to sue?" My father didn't answer. A young reporter near the back yelled that the live stream had passed 50,000 viewers. Comments scrolled across the monitors. "Respect for teachers." "He's the real Vail." The applause that once followed my father now belonged to a different story. Then he snapped. He lunged from his chair, ripped the microphone from my hand. "I raised you," he shouted, voice trembling, "and this is how you repay me." I looked straight at him. "You didn't raise me," I said. "You raised your image. I was just a prop." Gasps cut through the air. Clarice grabbed his arm, begging him to sit. Ilara stepped forward. "Before this turns into another speech, there's one more document." She nodded to the technician, and the screen changed to an email with my father's signature. "Ignore the clause. Announce before the gala." She turned to him. "No one trapped you, Bennett. You broke your own bridge." Dr. Patel confirmed it with a quiet finality. "The trust is dissolved." I bent down, picked up my badge from the podium, Dusk Vale Educator, and laid it flat on the wood. "I don't need anyone to call me their son," I said, "as long as my students still call me their teacher." It started at table 19. One person stood, then another, until the entire back of the room was on its feet clapping. The sound rippled forward until even the front rows joined in. My father left the stage without a word. No one followed. Ilara took my hand. "You just taught them more in 10 minutes than he did in 30 years. The chandeliers dimmed, the stage lights cooled, and for the first time all night, the light felt honest, simple, steady, real. 6 weeks later, Rose Hill was quiet again. No lights, no orchestra, no applause, just the echo of chairs being arranged for the first board meeting of the Vail Renewal Fund. I looked around the room that had once humiliated me. "This is where he told me to leave," I said. "Now it's where I sign our first grant." Ilara smiled, flipping through a folder. "It's poetic, really. His ballroom. Our beginning." The fallout had been swift. My father was forced into early retirement. Clarice left Seattle without saying goodbye. Sloane's firm suspended her after the plagiarism review confirmed everything. News outlets called it the Vail scandal. Universities used it as a case study on integrity. Meanwhile, Ilara and I rebuilt. She took her rightful title, CEO of Lumina Tech and executive director of the new fund. I remained a teacher, just as I'd always been. The Vail Renewal Fund was already sponsoring classrooms, teacher grants, and scholarships. 120 schools. 300 educators. At our first press event, I stood at the podium and said, If they don't give you a seat at the main table, build your own. On the wall behind me hung a plank of reclaimed wood engraved with the words, "For every teacher who was told they were just a teacher." A week later, my phone rang. My father's voice was rough, smaller than I'd ever heard it. "You won," he said. "Are you happy now?" I didn't win, I told him. I just stopped losing. He asked to meet, said he wanted to apologize. I told him what it would take: 6 months of therapy and a public apology to the teaching community. He hung up. I stood there for a long time afterward, realizing I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. During our next board meeting, we deliberately kept the same corner where table 19 once stood. "We'll keep it here," I said, "so we never forget where change begins." Dr. Patel walked over, smiling. "Then this corner is now the command center." Laughter filled the room, the kind that felt earned, light, human. Midway through the meeting, a staffer handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "You told me different doesn't mean less. I believed you. I'm studying to be a teacher." I tried to read it aloud but couldn't finish. The room clapped quietly, the sound soft and certain. Later that evening, Alara asked, "If your father calls again?" I smiled. "I'll answer. I don't need him to admit anything. I already did." She reached for my hand. "That's freedom." Before we left, I turned to the stage where it had all started. He said, "You can leave," I whispered, and I did. Then I came back with everyone they overlooked. We don't sit at the back anymore. We are the table. Somewhere from a video Alara played on her phone, children's voices echoed through the room, students from the schools we'd helped saying, "Thank you, teachers." Value doesn't need permission. Respect doesn't come from titles. Sometimes you need a night of collapse to realize you were the light all along.